Where does he get that Psalm 135? I don't even remember where he had it. I heard you guys had a ton of events last week.
Oh, man. They were just stacked up all the time. We're gonna start some of our main events where we bring speakers here.
Okay.
We're gonna start taking it on the road across the country. So we'll bring in those guest speakers, but we'll do it with various churches across the country. So it means a lot of my team's gonna be traveling.
You, Grace churches, Grace Bible churches?
Yeah.
Alaska, one of those?
I'll be with those churches in March.
So we have this mic that we wanna, I told you about it, we're gonna pass around.
Yeah.
Maybe they say like, if you wanna say something. to-
Okay.
To the
Just
company,
raise their hand and
we'll pass the mic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, buddy.
Okay. Hopefully we've all had a chance to share a couple thoughts. Anybody want to share something that came out in your discussion? Something we've learned, whether about anxiety or about yourself? Oh, hey, sorry, Isaac. I meant to say this. We have a microphone that we're gonna bring around for you guys when you make comments, so just shoot a hand up. We'll get you that. My bad. Again.
One thing we revisited from the chapters that I found very insightful is how the author says that anxiety can be thought of as a futile exertion of energy. And I just found that insightful because as he listed out different types of behaviors that are the result of anxiousness, I thought it just fit into that category of thinking about anxiety so well, whether it's unnecessarily eating, shopping online, biting your fingernails, fill in the blank. So that was one thing I found pretty insightful.
Yeah, thanks. Anybody else? You're gonna get your exercise today.
Yeah, so the idea that we talked about, how there's this fusion when we pair with anxiety. But when we identify that anxiety and what is and how that's kind of controlling us, we separate ourselves from it. It's just a really the idea how we can still like coexist with it and grow stronger from it. Like 1 Corinthians 12:9 talks about his power is made perfect in weakness. That same idea, how we're able to identify that weakness and still boast about it like Paul does.
Yeah, that's a great thought. I think one of the things how I would maybe answer that, I've always understood that anxiety comes from fear. I'm not sure that I had ever really connected that it was a fear of loss. I thought, and then we're gonna talk right now about the formula that he came up with, and it does make sense. And it makes sense that our minds could, say we're gonna lose something Because we are gonna lose things. We all have already experienced that at some level. So I'm interested as we go through this today, as we kind of have several different times to discuss this topic, what comes out of those discussions, because so my wife's not reading this, and she's the only person I really talk to in the world. So since she's not reading this book, I'm like, like trying to say, hey, well, I want to talk about what I'm going through in here. And she's like, I haven't read the book. So you're kind of like, it's like telling the last scene of a movie, to somebody that they don't appreciate it. So I'm interested to have some of the discussion with you guys too.
I think it's interesting that the American culture breeds that fear of loss because we have so much to lose. And that's why anxiety, as we get more materialistic, as we have more options, as we have more technology, as we have all of this, there's more loss available, more freedoms or more legislation or whatever.
Last night, my daughter Zori came home. Oh, we were at Napanee Missionary Church, so she was in with the kids thing, and she goes, yeah, we talked about the rich young ruler. And that to me is the epitome of what you just said, right? The guy had more than he was willing to give up and was very attached to him. I don't have that problem. As a high school teacher of 18 years, hard to believe. What I'd like to do is start in chapter 8. I know there might be a few things in the chapters before that that maybe didn't get covered. I don't want to not talk about those things, but for the sake of having to start somewhere, I felt like, and I didn't know until just recently that Deb skipped 2 chapters. She's never gonna accept a volunteer role again. There was a lot of really good stuff. I read this on the plane on the way to California, going through those other last week's chapters, but the anxiety formula, let's start with that. So anxiety equals loss times avoidance, and he equates it to Einstein's E equals MC squared. The idea that this is an exponential model, which infers that there is a lot of energy in mass, right? That's his point. And so in his formula, anxiety equals loss times avoidance. That loss has a lot of mass. That's an interesting way to think about that. So on 94 into 95, he says, one of the most curious features of anxiety is just how much energy it generates and exhausts. Anxious energy can fuel physical activity, such as pacing, hand-wringing, jitteriness. And he says rumination, worry, and discouragement can also consume our energy, disrupting our sleep and paralyzing our capacity to respond. I do think this is a very true statement. Anxiety is exhausting.
Yeah.
And I would, in my mind, I attribute it to trying to control what you can't control. And so it's like spinning 10 plates at the same time. Like you cannot let one drop, but yet you can't do this forever. You have to at some point accept that it's really it's not something I'm capable of handling. So then on the next page, on 96, I think is where it is. He gets in, he starts to talk about Psalm 139, and he's using, the book of Psalm as a way to illustrate how anxiety is presented, and then as a way to look at it differently. So I'm just going to read a little bit of Psalm 139. I don't know if I'll read it all, but we'll see. This is what David said. Oh Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from afar. You search out my path and my lying down and are acquainted with all my ways. Even before a word is on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it altogether. You hem me in behind and before, and lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high, I cannot attain it. Where can I go from your spirit, or where shall I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me. It's got to be one of the most encouraging verses, I think, in scripture. I think it interesting that David wrote this, because most of David's life is the opposite of that, right? Most of like everything he wrote was like, oh, woe is me, and I don't understand, God, why the sun shines on the unrighteous like it does on the righteous, and how long are you going to leave me in this hole in the ground and hiding and being chased by enemies? But yet he still says this. So I think that's a powerful testament to his real heart. Anybody have a response to how that, what that stirs in you? What does Psalm 139, in light of what we're talking about, anxiety, how does it resonate for you?
First of all, I hate this thing. Makes me so nervous, Darren. I was just thinking about how Psalm 139 can bring about, I think it can be used as a battering ram. And it can feel really scary. We can either use it against people of God knows, and there's almost this, I need to cover, I need to be like Adam and Eve and go hide. Or it feels scary, like there's no way I can get away from you. You go wherever I am at. And so as I was reading this, I was just reminded, like, I think we think about it in terms of judgment. Now, there's beautiful parts of that psalm. You know me from the very beginning, but this part about being found, I think you need to be judgment. I just wrote, it's either judgment or it's truer authenticity. Like his goal of examining the anxiety is not for judgment's sake or shame's sake, but for greater life, living versus living dead. And that was a really good way for me to look at it, because I don't know that we do. I think a lot of people, especially when they strive in their relationship with God, this chapter can feel scary, because anxious is brought up as something that God's seeking to find, which we can feel like we're sinning there, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Deb. Anybody want to follow up on that?
Yeah, it's kind of neat. It almost, it's like God inserts himself into the place where anxiety is so present. Where it says, where can I go? Where can I flee? Like you're always there. It kind of feels like that state of mind that you're in when anxiety is just encircling you. And it's like David's talking about, like I'm usually in this place of anxiety and hurt and pain, and that's been his life. But he's saying, but you, God, are actually there. You, God, are encircling me. You, God, are there when I go up to the heavens or make my bed in Sheol. And so it's almost putting a switch and saying, no, I'm actually separate from this pain and this hurt and this anxiety.
Great thoughts. Anybody feel that tension of like, because he's going to get into talking so much about avoidance, about how we avoid telling God the truth, about how we really feel, that obviously he already knows, but we still avoid telling him. I can honestly say before, I do not believe I have ever prayed a prayer about my own anxiety. I just don't know that I've ever done it. I don't feel like I have disabling anxiety or crippling anxiety, but I don't know that I've ever just expressed it out loud and said, man, there are times when I really do struggle with anxiety. So I love the concept of just being honest. I think that's what Jamie Winship's point is with confession, is it's telling the truth. Be honest with God about how you feel, because we have to. That has to be that starting point. So then, so this is on 96, down to the last paragraph. If we do invite God to investigate our anxious thoughts, what will happen? He says, see if there is any offensive way in me and lead me in the way everlasting. Yeah, I hope that becomes an encouragement to you rather than making you feel shame or fear. So I'd like to get to 98, 99, where he introduces this formula. So he talks a little bit about Einstein and E equals MC squared, and then he gives his formula. Anxiety equals loss times avoidance. And as a guy who really likes to think about things a lot, I spent some time thinking about this, and I started messing with the formula. You know, I don't know if you ever do that, but like as a guy who likes to cook in the kitchen, I always like to cook things different every time because I'm a rule breaker. So recipes are like rules meant to be broken. So I don't know how you could change it, but what are your guys' thoughts on this equation? Anxiety equals loss times avoidance. And is it real loss or is it perceived loss? And then we get to get really uncomfortable when we start getting to share our avoidance strategies, our habits here in a minute. But anyway, what does anybody have a thought on that this formula?
So I think to kind of go back to your like thought of the loss part, I think it can be like both and like the loss of things that you can see that are actually there, but then the loss of things that you can't or don't perceive to be there. Because I think another part of anxiety and loss is control or what you think should happen. And then I think that's where like the God part comes in too. Like we are not supposed to really control everything. Like God is in control of our lives. So when, you know, those who don't have a relationship with Jesus or those who do, but still haven't quite grasped that specific part of the relationship, there is avoidance in addressing the fact that you don't have control over your life, that someone else does, and you don't foresee like the future of that. So there's so many different types of loss, and then getting into the avoidance, which is so many different types of avoidances too, as well. Yeah.
Well, I would just say when I became a believer, it was because I wanted to avoid loss. Was I wrongly thinking in that concept? It's not really true, but I know a lot of people, for me, but I know a lot of people who are in that frame of mind. And so what I think that leads to is, and again, I think we'll get to this a little bit more later, is how do I really feel about God when I have said prayers and they did not get answered? We had a foster child years ago that passed away. And that was one of the hardest things I think my wife and I ever went through. 1-year-old boy. And when you have a kid who's really sick and you pray for healing and it doesn't happen, you start to really question, like, where is God in this, right? So I can just say, like, and that there are a lot of other examples through the years. We tend to now say, like, you just have to choose your pain in life because you can't avoid it. Just choose which form you're going to get because it's coming for you. So in that section on 99, he says, where it says God, right? God gets present with us in our anxiety, helps us recognize our anxiety and lovingly accepts our anxious selves. I have a hard time accepting that. Anybody else have a hard time accepting that God can accept my anxiousness and my weakness? That's a hard one for me. Because like the last sentence says, Christianity as a blueprint for avoiding loss during our lifetimes is simply false. So, yeah. Under the section on love, I want to just kind of take a few minutes to stay in this part. We suffer anxiety because we are vulnerable to losing what we most love. And that's to John, your point, right? The rich young ruler, the idea that we love our stuff and we can't let it go. To be free of anxiety is to be free of any love which is capable of being lost, which in turn would mean becoming inhuman. And then he talks about sociopaths and psychopaths, right? The people who don't struggle with that. On the top of 100. But humans were made to love this world with all of its experiences, things, values, and above all people. Like we were designed to be like, obviously God is love, right? God gave us that ability, but yet it's also where we struggle. So I put this in here from C.S. Lewis on that handout that I gave you guys from his book, The Four Loves. This is so striking to me as a either or. You got to choose one of these. So to love at all is to be vulnerable. Love anything in your heart will be wrung and possibly broken. If you want to make sure of keeping it intact, you must give it to no one, not even an animal. Wrap it carefully around with hobbies and little luxuries. Avoid, there's that word again, avoid all entanglements. Lock it up safe in the casket or coffin of your selfishness. But in that casket, safe, dark, motionless, airless, it will change. It will not be broken. It will become unbreakable, impenetrable, irredeemable. To love is to be vulnerable. As a parent, that's a hard one, right? I think my anxiety mostly lies in my kids and my care for them. Okay, back to our little groups again. You can feel free to get up or join any other group, but let's run through those first questions at the top of where it says key questions, chapter 8 and 9. What do I most fear losing? What's the likelihood that I'll actually suffer that loss? And then why do I fear that so much? So like 6 or 7 minutes, maybe we'll run through those with each other, and then we'll come back together. How did you answer that first one?
What do I most fear losing? Certainly relationships.
Is both of the mics still on?
What's that?
Both of the mics still there?
Yes.
Family relationships. How about you?
I think most of my anxiety around that lies around my kids. We don't parent, quote unquote kind of normal kids. Like I've got kids that just think the world's just gonna be a hard place for them to navigate. And I think that's where, like, if I could control the outcomes for my kids, I would feel much better. So. Yeah, and this actually, so getting all the way into chapter 12, like. And what it says next is like the odds of losing it. 20%. That's encouraging.
Very encouraging, yeah.
But what he gets to is that whole concept of like, we gotta understand eternity and what we're living and what's coming, because he ends up talking about stoicism, right? And what's the other one? Platoism and like all these different philosophies. You don't get back what you lose, right? But in Christianity, you get back everything that you lose. Right. So he goes into like when Jesus comes back and shows himself to the disciples. And they're like, I think they're looking at a ghost. It says, I was seeing a ghost, I got flesh and bones, just like you. And anybody got anything to eat? The author, like, I love what he does. He says, he knew what they were afraid of, that they weren't gonna get back this. Right? We're so tied to it. And Jesus said, no, you're gonna get back everything. And obviously more and more. But it's so hard to stay focused on that. Life just
More in apologetics, we dealt with the issue of the problem of evil. Hard questions to answer.
You know, I'd love that discussion. I think, the one I wish we would piggyback with it more is. I mean, evil, pain, it's like, you know, that's where you're gonna find God, right? It's like those hard things are gonna go over the example with everybody else in scripture, but. I think from our society, the devil uses both, right? He uses whichever one he feels like is gonna keep you in the right place for him. Either the problem of pain or the problem of pleasure, whichever one gets you to not have a close relationship with Jesus.
Totally. Totally. You still minister a lot in parish churches? You minister a lot in parish churches?
I mean, we lived through that, you know, we did. Stacy did, let's shoot, she did a Paris women's retreat last year. come back together and land the plane, as they say. Hi, Dan, good to see you.
Darren, I love where anxiety is playing to. I want to be you.
You haven't shared what your number would be.
I was gonna tell you, that's amazing. I was thinking 80 or 90.
I won't say that it's always probably been, I'd say it fluctuates at times. There's times it's definitely been higher, but. I don't know, I think, he gets into so much good stuff in the next few chapters. Kind of don't want to get ahead of myself, but I think a lot of my ability to handle that goes back to how I was raised as a kid, you know? Yeah. So. We do this kind of quick, what are we afraid of losing? So you just want to share kind of a quick thought, like what, like I said, for me, it really revolves around my kids. Like the suffering, the loss of, the pain that comes because of how much I care for my kids, that's what I think I struggle the most with, but you guys.
Talking a little bit and a little brief, I feel like I equate loss with disappointment a little bit. But just maybe fearing the loss of potential or the loss of an opportunity. Like not having, if I hope for something, and that's just gonna fall through. Yeah, I fear that my hopes won't actually. Do through it.
Thank you, Laura. So I want to stand because I'm about to have my knee replaced and it really bothers me when I sit in the same place all the time. But then I'm too old to see the words on the page, so I have to sit down. Gives me, yeah. My daughter yesterday, Zori, she goes, "You're almost 60." And I'm like, well, I guess what's almost mean? I don't know, because I'm almost 50, but she just got the numbers confused, but thanks a lot. Lori.
Relative, right?
Thanks a lot. Yeah, it doesn't really matter at this point. So what are the likelihoods we're gonna lose what it is we're afraid of losing? Pretty much 100%, right? If you read the book, you're like, yep, you're gonna lose it. No matter what it is, you're gonna lose it. And then my thought is, well, that's really encouraging. Thank you for that. But obviously he comes back to it at the point and gives us the perspective. You're gonna get it all back. That's the difference of what, when you have faith in Jesus, you're gonna get it all back. We'll get to that a little bit more later, but the question I think is important in getting to know yourself is, why does that thing cause you to have the fear that you have? Because there are reasons why we fear certain things and not other things. For some people, the fear of losing your reputation, the fear of your business closing, your fear of. And what I have come to conclude, just for the sake of brevity and sharing where I got to, was it has to do with your identity. The fear is losing who you are, which is not really possible, but it's the way we operate in this world mostly. So I think for me, as my identity of being a protector of my kids, I can't protect them. I can't protect them from the ultimate loss of they're gonna die. And that's a hard pill to swallow, that at some point I don't have that control. So I think no matter what it is, like he shares in the book, right? He was afraid to lose his business. He was afraid to lose his reputation, lose his money, lose his status in the community. Then he's afraid to lose his role as the pastor of the church. Like, especially for guys, I think maybe it's the same for women. We tend to get our identity from what we do. So if that's true, then if that goes away, then you have a crisis in your identity, because now who you thought you were is gone potentially. Okay, maybe we switch over, talk about the other side of the equation. So we talked about loss. Loss is the fact that we're gonna lose the things we care about, or we perceive we're gonna lose them. And on the other, the next part of it is the avoidance part. So this is in like the pages 100 to, this is where it kind of starts through, 105, somewhere in there. So let me start with this quote, page 102, the habits we adopt to avoid the unavoidable paradoxically increase anxiety. Our brains get trapped in futile loops, trying to do what is impossible. Excessive behavioral and cognitive avoidance is a leading hallmark of anxiety disorders. So I think that's interesting. The habits that I have to avoid the anxiety end up causing more anxiety. And I think again, so you mentioned control, like we're getting back into, I'm gonna make it happen. I'm gonna find a way to make it happen, when the reality is like, I can't, because we just established on the loss side, it's gonna be 100%. So page 103, detecting avoidance. Let me get to that one. Yeah, at the very top, detecting avoidance and the ways it multiplies anxiety can be a tricky exercise. And I think it's because we don't like to look in the mirror sometimes and then see the coping mechanisms that we have developed to manage ourselves. It's not very comfortable to admit the weaknesses that we have. So we avoid. There's also an attachment style, an avoidant attachment style. Who has that besides me? Anybody know? John, you have an avoidant attachment style? If you don't know your attachment style, see Deb. It's actually really, really valuable to learn your attachment style, because it'll tie into a lot of what we're talking about. There's only like, well, I mean, it's maybe a spectrum, but there's 4 different types. You can do a little online test and you can learn a little bit about it. It goes back to how you were raised in your childhood, to that conversation. Okay, so we're just gonna unpack just a little bit on the avoiding, and then we'll talk again in our little groups about what we're doing in our own lives to avoid. He kind of gets into, so I don't want to go through all of these, but 106, he shares a story for a few pages, right, of his own anxiety and like his oh, now I lost it.
Scoliosis story.
Yeah, he's afraid that he's not going to get healed, right? So the church is praying that he's going to get healed because his back hurts, he can't finish school and all that, so he's got all this anxiety. And then they're like, well, we're going to pray for you. We're gonna bring in this guy. He's like the dead ringer for healing prayer. He'll come in, and then amazing things will happen. In his mind, he was like, but what if it doesn't, right? Because now I'm going to, then, so he's in all of that mentality. And he says on 106, we never convened afterwards to convert to the reality that the Spirit did not come through in the way we expected. We avoided talking about the disappointment. Too many Christian communities tend to avoid casting doubt on whether leaders heard God correctly in a promising healing. So the pressure of doubt, I don't know if any of you guys feel this, but the pressure of doubt backs up on the disappointed person. And he gets into talking about doubting God. The best example I can think of this, you guys watch The Chosen? You've seen The Chosen? If you haven't seen The Chosen, you should watch The Chosen. It's so good. There's a scene in, I think it's in season 4, little James, walks with the limp. And him and the other disciples are talking and they're like, well, you should just ask him. Because he hasn't been healed by Jesus, but Jesus has been healing everybody. And so James is like, I don't want to bother him. Who am I that he would heal my leg? And he knows it's, he knows he sees me every day limping. He never has offered to heal it. So like there's a whole conversation going. And then finally, Jesus knows. He knows what he's thinking. And so he has a conversation with James. And that's so powerful because he says, I could heal you. But that weakness that you have, I'm going to use it in ways that you can't see yet, I have put that there for a purpose and I'm not removing it because of the purpose that it was originally put there for. So just wait till you see what I'm going to do with that. And it's like, okay, I feel like that's what he's saying in the now, but not yet. Yeah, now there's the things we're going through, but just wait. Just wait till we get to the other side. If you could get a glimpse of what I'm gonna do, then you would accept and not avoid the circumstances you're in now. So I thought that's just it's a great scene, and James ends up, bawling his eyes out because it's really impactful.
Yeah. Hey, Darren. Darren, can you hear me?
I feel like we're gonna need 6 hours today. That's all I can say. The last part I want to really get into, I guess, I want to just mention this on page 108, the same conversation. He's in the idea that anxiety takes people in different directions. The same anxiousness takes people in different directions. And the best example I could use of this is my wife and I were just sharing this in California. My wife went through a lot of hard things as a child. Her response to lose, like her dad, alcoholic, left when she was a kid. So her response was, I'm going to earn acceptance and earn love. So she's been very, very driven and very motivated to do and perform 3-sport college athlete, because for her, that was the hustle of earning the love, right? With what I went through as a kid with a mom who had postpartum depression and all those things, for me, it was the other way. No matter what I do, I can't earn it. So I'm not even going to try. Why try? Because I'm going to be rejected anyway. So you have two people who kind of come from the same place of fear of not being accepted, and yet end up in two different places in their response. But the heart kind of came from the same place. And I think, so he talks on 108 at the bottom, the stressed out student and the lazy slacker, I guess that's me, the lazy slacker, are both fueled by a desire to avoid failure, which is a loss of some aspect of their ideal self. The former avoids by overworking, while the latter avoids by not trying. And that's the conversation I think my wife and I have been having. But we all do it, right? We all have those avoidance techniques. Okay, anybody have a thought on any of that? Yep. Stan has a thought. Yeah. You want me to unmute it?
Can you hear me now? I'm talking.
Stan, are you out there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, since you moved on to that point, I'll just echo. I thought that was a really valuable thing that doesn't always look like you're avoiding when you're ruminating on something or hovering, and yet it still is a subtle way of avoiding the loss. So that was good. The comment I was going to make related to the previous point about little James and the healing, and also your earlier question too, was I wrong when I was, originally accepted Jesus, to do it with an intention to avoid loss. And I think, the thing that came to my mind in both of those topics was that our values change, right? And so the thing that you were afraid of losing then, and maybe from James's perspective, he really values being able to walk, but you can envision the time where he'll value what Jesus values more than that. And And then the loss of, of his physical ability won't be as scary a thing for him, or it won't create as much anxiety. That goes back to the formula, right? It's kind of hard to change what we value, but it can happen. Whereas changing what we're avoiding is something we can do a little bit more in real time and apply some willpower or some techniques or some peer pressure to it and get some quick reduction of anxiety with reducing the avoidance. But it's a very interesting question, thinking about the parable of the pearl and the treasure in the field and stuff, right? If we value the treasure or the pearl enough, or if we value what Jesus wants to do out of my lameness enough, it won't matter so much if we lose, you know, other things that we initially naturally lost. I remember when I was young, I wasn't sure if I wanted to go to heaven if there wasn't going to be Legos in heaven. And my mom assured me there would be Legos in heaven. And so I got with the program of following Jesus back when I was little. But now I don't care quite so much because I don't value Legos quite so much. I value more some of the things he's told me are going to be in heaven for sure. And I think I could be okay if I get there and I find out there's no Legos.
Thanks for sharing that, Stan. That was great. So let's get through this part here on avoidance on the handout that I gave you. So back to the same little groups that we were in. Describe what patterns of avoidance you might see in yourself. How does your avoidance impact your relationship with others or with God? And have you ever been disappointed or angry at God? Like in that conversation, maybe that leads to that. So let's do, again, 6 or 7 minutes trying to answer some of those questions. One's done and it feels good. It's the one that's not done that's not good.
Is that right?
Yeah.
ACL, meniscus, all of them?
So my ligaments are, I think, good. It's just arthritis. Like, yeah, man, just all those years of playing when I was a kid growing up playing on concrete and blacktop. Just so by the time I was like 23, 24, like right out of college, actually I was playing in Australia. I was like, it's not going well. I knew. So that's first surgery when I was 28, and then just they're like, well, you got to make it as long as you can because you're 28. Like they're not doing a knee replacement. So finally, right in the middle of COVID, had the first one done.
What was your recovery like?
Horrible. I mean, it was horrible. I think for a year I said I'd never do it again. And then,
Yeah, because we get so much feedback out of it. Yeah.
so, but now, like he said, when I had the left one done, he said, well, the right one needs to be partially done. But maybe by getting the left one done, maybe it'll, give you advice and time on it, but it's gotten so bad.
Weather bother it?
I mean, literally everything, like I can hardly walk, all the, like, getting out of a car, driving is the worst, because I can't move, it just stays in the same position. Sitting in a tree stand, not very easy.
Oh, I bet.
I can't sleep, I get like restless leg real bad, it's just awful. The surgeon's ready, they just said, just call and tell us when you're ready to do it. hunt and hike and. Hopefully our conversation on avoiding was good. Did you avoid the conversation too? Anybody want to share anything from their conversation? What is it, like, the people who sit in the back row, what are they avoiding? Do people that sit in the back row avoid? What'd you say? Oh, what'd you say?
So some of the things that I shared in our group, something that I think may be avoidance is when like something happens to me, I kind of just accept it and like try and move on because I like don't see maybe any productivity in sitting and wallowing in something that I know that I cannot change. So, but then I'm also thinking like, oh, is my avoidance in moving on, not addressing what can be in the like sitting in that moment of whatever it is. Like, yes, at the end of the day, I can't change what has happened or change the outcome, but there is probably something in that sitting that I'm not getting that I am avoiding, if that makes sense.
Thanks for sharing that. Anybody else? I just find this is an important thing for us to focus on. And yet uncomfortable to focus on it because nobody likes to admit there are weaknesses and that they avoid things that they shouldn't avoid, but. I think we all do it at some level, but in his formula, this is the one place I feel like he says you can't mitigate all the loss. You can do whatever you want, but you're gonna suffer the loss. But you can do some work to minimize your avoidance, to actually dealing with things in a way that's constructive. And rather than letting it build and build, and that changes that formula, the outcome of it. So he gets into discussing the spirit, right? How do you know? He says you gotta put in some work with the Holy Spirit, asking him to help reveal to you where you're at and how to move through whatever your anxiety is and your avoidance. And I think that's a really important point in that, I'm not sure if I can find it, but he says, basically he says the Holy Spirit's not a formula to follow, right? Like you don't just follow the formula to get to an outcome. It's like, it's a personal relationship so you don't look at it like if you check the box, you get the thing, right? It's not like that. I'll probably find it at some point. Yeah, the Spirit of God is a personal guide, not a formula. Thank you, John. So I want to just go through chapter 10 kind of quick, just because I know we have so much to cover and we have such short amount of time. But he starts talking about addictions, how we form habits that start when we're young and then they persist through life, and how challenging it is to change those habits. So I'm looking at, let's see. I want to address, I think this is an important thing. Page 124, there's a chart that compares like fight or flight avoidance patterns. And he uses away or around. I find it easier to just go with like fight or flight, because that's a term that I'm way more familiar with. But on the flight side, like avoiding certain conversations, social media addiction, shopping impulses, workaholism, compulsive busyness, and then addictions. On the fight side, rumination, obsessive compulsive behavior, rehearsing scenarios, badgering others, inability to let go. All of these as ways that we are finding to avoid dealing with what we need to deal with.
It's so weird because it feels like you are.
What do you mean? Oh, yeah. No, right. He says that. Like, you look at those and you're like, well, that's not avoiding, that's dealing with it. Right? Was there one that stands out on that list too?
It makes me chuckle badgering others.
You see that? Yeah.
The one that talks about reversing scenarios past or present, I think of one way that this is like the one way I would use to cope with anxiety, would be to come up with any possible scenario that could happen. That way I like rehearsed it, so I'm prepared for it before the scenario even happens. And I thought that was a good way to deal with it, like, oh, I'm prepared. My anxiety comes from not knowing what the situation is, so I have all these scenarios prepared, I'm prepared for the more anxiety. That doesn't, but then that's what, like, those are limited, like, finding that, we talked about.
Yeah, the rumination one, my wife will talk about that a lot. She feels like this is a trait that women deal with a lot. That just kind of thinking about something and ruminate, right? To like chew on it, that comes from the term of chewing your cud, right? To just sit and think and process over time. I don't know, maybe it's everybody's issue, but she has expressed that that's a real challenge. And how I see it come out, it's like we have a conflict in our, whatever. And like 3 days later, I'm like, it's distant memory. And then she'll be like, okay, so like, remember 3 days ago? I'm like, no. That's how I see it play out. So I wanna tie in a concept we talk about sometimes with this concept. The concept is self-soothing versus self-care. So we talk about like self-care, but what we tend to think is self-care tends to be more self-soothing, and they're not the same. And I just want to see, he doesn't use those terms. I'm interjecting those terms because he does bring up this point. So he at the bottom of 124, think of these two types of avoidance habits as handling two different types of balls. He's like, either you go this way or you go that way. And then he gets into on 125, fear of missing out, right? A desire to avoid some loss. Yeah, FOMO, right? Our teenagers really struggle with this one. But so then he says, notice how many of these away habits can escalate into addictions of various sorts. They're highly addictive because each one provides a temporary reprieve from the possibility of loss. But these habits cannot make that real possibility disappear, so we have to keep going back for another hit. I want to tell you that is self-soothing. Self-soothing is when you do a behavior that makes you feel good in the moment, but doesn't change any of your circumstances in life. It doesn't make tomorrow better. It just right now makes you feel better. So a bubble bath or whatever that is in that moment, that's like, I'm not even saying they're bad. I'm just saying you shouldn't refer to that as self-care. That's self-soothing. I'm going to make myself feel better. It doesn't change anything really. Tomorrow I'm going to wake up, the stress and anxiety are still going to be there. Self-care is sort of the opposite of that. And he gets into this on 127. But let me add the final thought on this on 126 at the top. Again, around habits make it appear like we're dealing with the issue of loss, to your point, Sue, Because we're constantly thinking, repeating behavior, rehearsing mentally, or badgering others around the possibility of loss. At the deepest level, we're still trying to avoid the loss. So that's where I feel like those self-soothing short-term fixes are. Jump across to 127. A key to breaking any addiction is stopping the etching. Right, see, it's talking about, I skipped the sentence where he's talking about the brain and how we create these destructive pathways, neural pathways in our brain. He says the key to breaking an addiction is stopping the etching process as much as we can and replacing it with new actions that lay alternative and healthier neural pathways. That is what self-care does. So self-care means I'm going to change the pattern of behavior so that I actually improve my circumstance. It's the long-term approach of saying, like, I know I hate being late and every day I'm late for work or I'm late for, so I'm going to start a new habit of getting up earlier, and then I have to start a new habit of going to bed earlier. And over time, you reinforce that, and then things change. Like now you're not stressed out because you're late, because you planned ahead. So in that vein, any thoughts or comments? Okay, so if I don't, I'll give you an example from our life. So when we started, we had 2 biologic kids, we started fostering. Completely failed. No idea how to raise kids from trauma. No idea. Like, we thought we were good parents. We say this a lot. And then we had kids, right? And then we thought we were pretty good parents because we had 2 biologic kids that were doing well. And then kids showed up in our home and we had no tools in the toolbox for dealing with these kids. Every strategy we did that with our bio kids, we tried with these kids, nothing. So an education on how to actually be successful is self-care. So my wife and I, we read every book you could read. We watched every video. We were like, we got to learn how to do this because we're not being successful now. So I would say self-care, that changed everything about our relationship with those kids and our perceptions and our ability to handle what was coming through the door. So self-care is when you do something that will change the future long-term. So an education, I think, is an easy one to see. Change an environment. If an addict goes to rehab and comes back to the same environment they were in before, it's not going to go well. They have to find a new place. And a friend of ours in a town we lived in Arizona had been addicted to meth, gone to prison for 5 years. The day he got out, he left Phoenix. He was in Phoenix, left Phoenix, never came back. He moved to our little town out in the country because he said, if I stay in that place, I know I'll be back living on the side of the canal, strung out on that. So a change in environment was an example of self-care. I don't think they all have to be that big. I mean, micro habits, right? That's a new term that's come out. Micro habits of just making small daily changes can lead to really major changes. I know, Deb, you deal with this a lot with burnout and stuff. Do you have any thoughts on that you want to add?
Honestly, the things you were saying, I think, were what I was saying. The only thing I would only add is that I don't think that self-care is a formula that someone's self-care may be different than someone else's. So you need to know yourself and what is rejuvenating and what is depleting, what things give me life, what things are temporary. I think that it's easy to think, well, you do this and that works for you, so then I'll do and I have that. But if you don't know yourself,
Yes,
that's part of what can, and what even drives. If you don't know what drives your burnout, then you're probably never going to stop really burning out. So it's the insight counts there somewhere.
yeah, and I think back to that story I shared about Stacy and I, my wife, we end up in totally different places coming from some of the same things. And my wife likes to go running when she gets stressed out. She needs
You don't
to
do
come
that?
see you, Deb. For her, it's all about the energy that she has built up. Her stress is like she's just got all this energy. She's got to get that energy out. Which I would say she's a hyper vigilant person, right? She just got all that. That's fine for her. I don't want to do that. I think that would make me more stressed out to try to go run. I want to go sit down and like read a book, watch a show, sit in front of a fireplace, like. And so to your point, like we're all different that way. So you got to know yourself. Don't try to make it fit if it doesn't fit. No, I think that would lead to more anxiety. But
And you
one
also don't
29,
want it
he
to
addresses
be-
what you just said, I think. So it's like the middle of the page. To break your own addictions, you will need to find your own countermeasure. The best ones will be the ones you co-fashion with the Spirit. Ask the Spirit for guidance and listen for ideas that bear vocal fidelity to Jesus. Yep. Hang on. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Stan.
and again, that I'm glad you read that last bit too, though, because that does emphasize the fact that you want to find something that's going to be healthy and not just another way of running away from it. You were talking about Stacy running, but it also reminded me of him biking, and it didn't work for him because he still would ruminate when he went biking, and and so yeah, I thought that was, especially related to Sue's comment as well, but his insight that you talked about, it's the fight instincts, whether they're ruminating or kind of taking it out on other people or whatever, it's still a form of denial because you're not accepting the loss. So whether it's really ultimately a kind of denial, just like numbing out on alcohol or workaholism or distracting yourself on the internet. But the kind of positively, what's the alternative to that? Two words that come to mind I think are real helpful from a spiritual perspective. One is surrender, and if especially if it's an idol, right? Because he says in some cases what's driving our anxiety is an idol, and it actually is something that we're putting in the position of God to get some control over, and there we shouldn't be hanging on to it. Also, if we're what you said about identity is super good. If we're identifying with our false self, he calls it the ideal self, but the psychology and the contemplative communities call it false self. If we're identifying with that, then yeah, again, it's kind of a denial uh, that we should be letting go of, that we can lose. That is something that we're going to lose. So the other word though that I thought is helpful comes from Jacques Philippe's book Interior Freedom, is holy consent. He talks about even in examples of people in concentration camps or places like that where they can find peace. Again, it's like surrender. You find peace by making, if you have to do something, for example, to fight off the wolf or whatever, you do it. Don't just ruminate about it. But also, there's times where you accept the loss and you say, "This is going to happen, and I'm okay with it, Jesus." And that's actually the path to freedom and not neither kind of denial that Chang is talking about.
Thanks, Dan. Julia, did you tell me we were going to go through chapter 11 today? So I do want to start chapter 11, but what I would like to do is start with start getting into chapter 11 now, but there's so much value in this chapter. I want to start with it again when we get back together next week, because it's just, I found it so helpful. So chapter 11, he starts off with this sort of mindfulness exercise on contemplating eternity, which again, for the sake of time, we won't do that now, but on 138, we'll be making an unexpected connection, our thoughts about eternity and how they may influence our anxiety. And I like where he goes with this. I think this is an intriguing direction to take us into how to process and heal and move out of anxiety. So that's why I want to end with this and start with it. So 139, third paragraph down, fourth paragraph, the secret to nurturing this capacity to hold on is simultaneously simple and challenging. You must believe you get back what you lose. I just like highlight that as a concept. You must believe that you get back what you lose. So a little while ago, we talked, what are we afraid of losing? And the really encouraging thought that you lose everything. And then now he's coming back sort of full circle and saying, it is encouraging because you're going to get it all back, all of it and more. Once you can grasp the truth that restoration will come on the other side of loss, you can anticipate its arrival amid the pain. And this anticipation builds your tolerance even more. Some of you guys know scripture better than me, but the passage that says perseverance brings character, and character in the end brings hope. This is what I think it's addressing. It's that idea that yeah, count it all joy when we go through hard things, but it's not because we're going through the hard thing. It's because we know what's coming on the other side of that hard thing. There is going to be a change and a person standing on the other side. Go on to page 140. Second paragraph down, middle of the page. When it comes to anxiety, we face a challenge far more momentous in consequences, but similar in nature. We are called to hold on through the experience of loss. The secret to conquering this far weightier challenge is no different. We have to believe that we get back what we lose. To hold on through the loss, we must be able to anticipate the future restoration on the other side of loss. This is why holding a correct vision of eternity matters for anxiety. One of the things he shares in here is that when he was a kid, his vision of what heaven was like was not inspiring to him. He's like, yeah, I don't really want to look forward to that, right? Like looking like an angel floating in the clouds, you know. All it made me think of was Monty Python and the Holy Grail with the way they portray God speaking through the clouds as a cartoon, right? Like this is incorrect vision of what's really going to be happening. So he in this chapter gets into if we really understand what will happen on that side, it will be encouraging to us and give us the ability to hold on through the hard things now, because we know where we're gonna end up and what we're gonna get back. So what we'll do is we'll start with 142 next time. So he talks about Stoicism, Epicureanism, and Platonism. All of us who are like, what are those? You got a week to figure it out. He does tell us, but anybody have any last thoughts before we kind of wrap this up? What I want to make sure in this, I think it would be sad for us to go through this 4-week study and not internalize what this is telling us. I think about it, you know, you guys who are in student leadership and working with kids, other students, that's good to say, that's good. I can use these tools to help them. I think it would be sad for us to not internalize and say, what am I learning about myself and how can I help myself through the process of this? So hopefully some of the discussion today was helpful with that. Yeah. Thank you guys for being here. Maybe we'll see y'all next week.
Yeah, thank you again. Make sure that before you leave, one thing I'd like to challenge you is take a look at that anxiety loss avoidance formula and play with that a little bit. I think it's kind of interesting, Darren. And so if you haven't, check that out in your book and play with it a little bit. I was kind of tinkering with it last night a little bit, so kind of interesting. But hey, have a great week. And again, we'll see you back on November 21st at 12 o'clock. And we'll have a great time together. Blessings.